More than a natural phenomenon, the absolute cold functioned as a silent judgment of human survival, distinguishing resilient societies from those incapable of evolving. For centuries, the popular image of the Vikings was built on strength, violence, and extreme physical endurance. Men wrapped in thick furs facing endless storms while ice dominated the horizon. The narrative seems logical. A warrior people would have survived because they were stronger than the others. But modern archaeology reveals something far less intuitive. The Vikings didn't survive because they could withstand the cold. They survived because they understood how cold really works. In Scandinavian territories, temperatures below -30 degrees were not uncommon. The wind swept through fjords like invisible blades, removing body heat with brutal efficiency. In these environments, the human body does not fail from immediate freezing, but from a gradual loss of thermal energy. Death arrives slowly, almost imperceptibly, while the person still believes they are safe. It was in the face of this reality that the first forgotten Viking survival technique emerged: invisible thermal control. Nordic longhouses were not simple huts. They were carefully planned environmental systems. Many were partially excavated into the ground, using the earth itself as natural insulation. The prevailing wind never directly hit the entrance. The low roof reduced excessive heat circulation. Smoke from the central fire circulated before escaping, heating the interior without requiring large flames. The goal was not to produce heat. It was to prevent him from escaping. Each architectural decision reduced the need for fuel, preserving human energy and scarce resources. The shelter functioned like a living organism, balancing temperature, humidity, and air circulation. The cold was not fought head-on. It was redirected. This principle has partially disappeared in modern thought. Today, survival is often associated with power. More equipment, more fire, more effort. The Vikings understood the opposite. The greater the artificial production of heat, the greater the energy consumption required to maintain it. To survive meant spending less. Within these houses, the second technique emerged: the conscious management of human energy. During the winter, the social pace deliberately slowed down. Unnecessary movements were avoided. Intense physical work was concentrated into short, planned periods. Tools were always kept close at hand. Daily life was organized to minimize travel. Sleeping more was part of the strategy. Talking around the fire saved fuel. Collective activities reduced heat loss. The Vikings understood something that physiology now confirms. The human body in cold environments consumes an enormous amount of calories just to maintain its internal temperature. Excessive activity didn't demonstrate strength. It represented risk. Survival depended on energy discipline. Winter was experienced as a state of conservation, almost akin to cultural hibernation. The entire community adapted its behavior to the environment, transforming itself into a collective system for preserving energy. This mindset reveals a profound difference between the past and the present. The modern survivor often imagines confronting disaster through constant action. The Viking model taught that, in certain environments, excessive action hastens failure. True strength lay in knowing when not to act. Thus, while the wind howled outside and darkness dominated much of the day, entire families endured impossible months not through heroic courage, but through a silent understanding of the relationship between body, shelter, and environment. And yet, controlling heat and conserving energy did not solve the biggest problem in Northern Europe, because the cold was not the ultimate enemy. The real test began when supplies slowly dwindled, and famine emerged as an inevitable threat. Hunger doesn't come through violence. She settles in quietly. In the Nordic territories, winter rarely killed first through cold. It weakened slowly, reducing bodily reserves, consuming supplies, and forcing entire communities to confront a far more complex enemy than snow or wind: the weather. Most ancient societies feared the depths of winter. The Vikings feared the period that followed, when the snow began to melt, what historians call the empty station. Weeks in which winter had already consumed almost all resources, but spring still did not offer enough food to sustain life. It was within this predictable cycle that the third forgotten technique was born: strategic hunger. Contrary to modern logic, the Vikings did not try to completely avoid food scarcity. They learned to manage it. Archaeological excavations show something surprising. Foods richer in fat and protein were often preserved until the end of winter, even when food was becoming scarce. The decision seems contradictory. Why hoard the best resources when the need is already great? Because they understood that surviving the winter wasn't enough. They needed energy precisely when work would begin again: repairing boats, preparing the soil, rebuilding fences destroyed by ice, and starting fishing required immediate strength. Without rapid energy recovery, the entire community could collapse after months of successful survival. Hunger, therefore, was not just deprivation. It was planned. Fish was fermented, meat cured by the cold wind, dairy products transformed into durable foods capable of lasting for months. The harsh environment became part of the preservation process. Ice served as natural storage. Dry air prevented spoilage. Nothing was preserved by chance. Each food had an ideal time for consumption. The Vikings did not hoard to accumulate wealth. They stockpiled to get through cycles. This mentality contrasts sharply with modern preparation, often based on massive, individualized storage. For the Norse, food was a collective resource, distributed according to the community's needs. Individual surplus represented a social risk, as survival depended on the balance of the entire group. The shared meal thus became a psychological tool as important as its nutritional value. Eating together reduced anxiety, strengthened bonds, and maintained emotional stability during prolonged periods of scarcity. Lonely hunger weakens the spirit. Shared hunger preserves hope. And it is at this point that the fourth forgotten technique emerges: the strategic use of animals as a thermal and nutritional system. Domestic animals were not kept solely for future production. During the winter, they were an active part of the human ecosystem. In many longhouses, the interior space was divided to allow animals to remain close to the inhabitants. The body heat generated by them helped to stabilize the internal temperature of the shelter. Cows, sheep, and goats became living sources of thermal energy. Animal respiration, movement, and metabolism helped reduce the fuel consumption needed for human heating. At the same time, these animals represented gradual food reserves: milk, fat, and eventually meat, used as needed. Nothing was separate. Humans, animals, and architecture functioned as a single integrated biological system. This integration reveals something profoundly different from the modern view of survival, which tends to separate humans from the environment and other living beings. For the Vikings, survival meant participating in a complete ecological cycle, where each element sustained the other. Winter was not experienced by isolated individuals, but by a vibrant network of relationships. Even with efficient shelter, preserved energy, and carefully planned food supplies, there was one mistake that could destroy any preparation: moving at the wrong time. Many ancient travelers died not for lack of skill, but for choosing the wrong time to set off. It was precisely from this observation that one of the most counterintuitive Viking survival strategies emerged, a technique based not on action, but on the deliberate refusal to act. In extreme environments, movement can be more dangerous than immobility. Modern culture often associates survival with constant action, moving, exploring, seeking resources, advancing. But the Nordic peoples learned the opposite lesson through centuries of brutal observation of nature. Many died not for lack of courage, but for moving at the wrong time. Thus emerged the fifth forgotten Viking survival technique: smart, seasonal mobility. The Vikings didn't travel whenever they wanted. They only traveled when the environment allowed. During the dead of winter, long journeys were rare and carefully considered. Snow concealed obstacles, ice made rivers unpredictable, and the wind could turn a short trip into a death sentence. Instead of defying these conditions, entire communities adopted deliberate periods of stay. Waiting was a strategy. The settlements functioned as points of stability in an unstable world. The energy preserved within the longhouses should not be wasted on unnecessary journeys. Extensive hunts were replaced by pre-positioned traps. Gathering became localized. Known territory was valued more than the unknown. This choice reveals a profoundly strategic mindset. The true survivor is not the one who manages to move forward under any conditions, but the one who recognizes when the environment has made movement irrational. Spring, summer, and early autumn were periods of intense movement. Ships set sail, trading expeditions were undertaken, and new lands were explored. But this expansion only happened because entire months were dedicated to containment. Movement and pause formed a cycle. The Vikings understood something that behavioral science now confirms. Survival depends on the right rhythm between action and recovery. Civilizations that ignore this balance collapse due to excessive and continuous exertion. In the modern world, where speed is often confused with efficiency, this technique seems almost paradoxical. Coaches train to act quickly, but rarely train to remain still when necessary. The Vikings trained both. They knew how to wait. And while they waited, they developed another essential skill, perhaps the most invisible of all. The sixth forgotten technique: advanced environmental awareness. Without modern instruments, every detail of the environment became vital information. Navigators observed wave patterns to identify hidden currents. The trajectory of birds indicated proximity to land. Subtle changes in the color of the sky anticipated storms hours before any obvious sign. The snow could talk too. Different textures revealed unstable ice. The sound under footsteps indicated safe thickness or imminent danger. The smell of the air could herald thawing, rain, or a sudden drop in temperature. Nothing was ignored. Survival depended on the ability to perceive changes before they became visible threats. Modern research suggests that Viking navigators used sun crystals capable of locating the sun's position even under completely overcast skies. However, more important than any tool was continuous sensory training. Children grew up learning to observe the horizon, interpret winds, and recognize natural patterns. The environment ceased to be a mere backdrop. It was becoming language. This direct relationship with nature developed a form of intelligence that is difficult to replicate today. Without constant distractions, the human mind became extremely sensitive to environmental variations. The unknown was not feared, it was studied. The Vikings were not seeking to eliminate risk. They sought to understand it early enough in order to avoid it. And perhaps that is the biggest difference between old and modern preparedness. Today, technology often replaces perception. Digital systems promise to predict dangers, while human attention gradually weakens. For the Nordic peoples, survival meant keeping their minds aligned with the natural world in real time. Still, all these techniques, thermal control, energy conservation, strategic hunger, integration with animals, seasonal mobility, and environmental awareness, depended on one final element, a factor that no tool could replace: Because, in the end, the biggest human mistake has never been underestimating the cold. It was believing that he could survive on his own. Throughout history, human survival has rarely belonged to the strongest individual. He belonged to the most adapted group. Modern myths often celebrate the lone survivor, the figure who stands alone against the world, overcoming their environment through personal strength and sheer self-sufficiency. This image is powerful, cinematic, and deeply rooted in the contemporary imagination. But she doesn't describe the Vikings, and perhaps I have never described any society that truly thrived in extreme environments. The seventh forgotten Viking survival technique was also the most invisible: the collective survival mentality. In Norse settlements, survival was not an individual skill, it was a shared responsibility. Each member of the community played an essential role within a larger system. The hunter depended on the builder depended on the farmer depended on the navigator depended on those who remained to protect the settlement. No skill existed in isolation. Survival emerged from cooperation. Archaeological excavations show clear evidence of resource redistribution. Food was shared during critical periods. Tools circulated among families. Shelters were maintained collectively. Even elderly or injured individuals remained integrated into the group, transmitting knowledge accumulated over generations. Human worth was not measured solely by physical strength. It was measured by its contribution to collective equilibrium. This social structure created something extremely powerful: systemic resilience. If an individual failed, the system remained functional. If a harvest was lost, the knowledge stored by the community allowed for adaptation. If the weather changed, decisions were made collectively, reducing impulsive errors. The Vikings understood something fundamental about hostile environments. The greatest danger was not the cold, hunger, or distance. It was human isolation. Prolonged solitude reduces judgment, increases risk-taking, and weakens adaptability. Nordic communities combated this danger through constant social rituals. Stories were told around the fire. Festivals marked seasonal changes. Games, music, and narratives preserved identity and purpose even during the darkest months. These practices were not entertainment. They were psychological survival mechanisms. Keeping the collective spirit warm made the winter bearable. Within this system, individual heroism was discouraged. Risky decisions made without consensus could endanger everyone. Courage did not mean acting alone. It meant acting responsibly within the group. This philosophy contrasts sharply with modern preparedness, often based on absolute independence. Personal equipment, individual shelters, and isolated strategies create the illusion of total autonomy. The Vikings knew that no human being is entirely self-sufficient. True preparation did not eliminate dependence. She organized the interdependence. And when we observe the 7 techniques together, a very different picture emerges from the one popularized by modern culture. The invisible thermal control taught how to conserve energy. The conscious management of human effort protected the body from exhaustion. Strategic hunger transformed scarcity into planning. The use of animals integrated humans into the living ecosystem. Smart seasonal mobility avoided unnecessary risks. Environmental awareness allowed them to anticipate unseen dangers. And the collective mindset ensured continuity even in the face of uncertainty. None of these techniques depended on advanced technology. They all depended on understanding. The Vikings didn't survive because they dominated nature. They survived because they accepted that they were part of it. The environment was neither an enemy nor an obstacle. It was a complex system to which human behavior needed to constantly adapt. Perhaps that is why so much of this knowledge has been forgotten. As modern technology has come to protect humankind from natural cycles, the need for direct observation has diminished. Adaptation has been replaced by artificial control. Comfort has made invisible skills that once meant the difference between life and death. And yet, these principles remain valid, because crises, climate change, isolation, and scarcity continue to be part of the human experience. The story of the Vikings is not just about the past. It is a silent reminder that survival never depends solely on what we possess, but on how we think, cooperate, and perceive the world around us. In the end, perhaps the greatest lesson left by these northern peoples lies not in their battles or maritime conquests. It lies in understanding something simple and profoundly human. To survive doesn't mean to resist the environment alone. It means learning to live in balance with it and with each other. Because when the cold arrives, when resources dwindle, and when the future becomes uncertain, it is not individual strength that sustains life. It is shared knowledge. It's collective adaptation. It is the ability to remember that no civilization has weathered difficult times in isolation. And perhaps the true Viking legacy isn't a specific technique, but one silent question has persisted for centuries. If those who lived without advanced technology were able to understand the natural world so deeply, what exactly have we forgotten as we've distanced ourselves from it? And perhaps that's precisely why revisiting the past still matters. Each ancient story carries fragments of knowledge that remain relevant in an increasingly fast-paced and unpredictable world. If this journey through the forgotten techniques of the Vikings has awakened in you a new way of observing survival, history, and human behavior itself, follow this channel and continue exploring with us the knowledge that time has almost erased. Subscribe to continue discovering stories where past and present meet, not as nostalgia, but as living learning.